So I'm going to demonstrate for you this now. I'm going to attack this mob until it hits 90% HP. All right, and then I'm going to stop pressing any abilities. Good Tuesday to you all, wonderful people, and welcome to the TDP. All right, I get it. I get it. I saw the response to the last one, which many of you found very helpful, about how to not be overwhelmed in Mythic Plus and how we can learn from dungeons. But I talked about a number of things that, as a healer, I couldn't really demonstrate. And to be fair, the videos I've done on those subjects are a little old. So one of the big ones that I brought up multiple times was the idea of threat capping. And this goes hand in hand with a number of tweets I've had regarding tanking and being, again, somewhat overwhelmed, which is what I tried to cover in the other things. Being overwhelmed while tanking. And I mentioned the idea of threat capping in that video, and I think it's worth demonstrating that. So we've just jumped into a heroic here, because this is not something particularly complex, but it will give you an idea of what to do. So we're obviously on the prop warrior before we say good day and goodbye to the terrible, awful design of this class spec nightmare fuel that it is, and a number of decent fixes that apparently must wait until the next expansion, but that's I'm kind of driving myself crazy trying to think of that. Honestly, I don't know why they decide to wait for such important changes to come till later when they're clearly just like tooltip fixes and spell changes. But neither here nor there. If I was to ask many of you who are interested in tanking, because one of the great benefits about when I did my tanking series, which I recommend you watch if you're remotely interested in tanking, last Christmas or just before, we spent a week looking at each role in the game. So DPS, tanking, and healing. And looking at the ideas and foundations of how you can get into it, how you can get to the stage where you can start doing the very advanced things, and so on and so forth. And we did like 1 to 5 and 1 to 4 and 1 to 3 videos, something like that on each role. I'll try and link them down below. But they're a bit old, so you're not going to find them if you're a recent subscriber, or perhaps at the time you weren't interested in those things. That's fine. So anyway, I talked about threat capping and the role of a tank. So what would we say if we were to brainstorm as a team? I should have done this on stream, so I would have had more options for you, but I want to keep it relatively basic. If I was to brainstorm with you guys, what are the roles of a tank? Well, the first thing you're likely to say to me is something like hold aggro. Okay, that's true. Holding aggro means that you should be working in a way to make all the enemies attack you. And that means they're not attacking anybody else. And that's the role of the tank, right? Okay, that's fine. What else would we say? Lead the group. Leading the group's an interesting one, because it's one of the ones that people start to fall down on when it actually comes to tanking. They don't like leading the group. They're nervous about leading the group. But what does leading the group mean? One, it means you're going to try and pull the enemies. Obviously, if you pull first, less likely the enemies are going to attack somebody else, because you've had the time to assert your dominance over them. You can look at it that way. But if you're getting the first attacks in and you're leading the charge, so to speak, you're the spearhead of the group, then you're likely to have an overall easier time. We'll come back to this subject later, because I've no doubt some of you in your head are going, well, other people always pull. Yeah, I know. Didn't mean to use a silly voice, really, but I'm trying to use somebody's voice that isn't mine in reference to responding to that. But leading the group. You want to lead your group as best you know through the dungeon in order to do it efficiently when it comes to Mythic Plus, doing the correct amount of trash. However, I will point this out here. You are not fucking God. And I think this is a big deal. You are not God. For those of you who are seasoned tanks, you are not God. Overall, routing throughout dungeons has changed significantly since the start of BFA and is still being altered today. And a lot of that alteration difference week by week comes with different affixes. Now, don't overburden yourself by saying, my God, how many different routes do I need to learn? Typically, there are only a couple that are worth learning. I certainly don't know them all. Don't think you're like, this is knowledge everybody has. No, it's not. So pay attention to people who've had experience. If you really want to get into your tanking and you feel like you want to become a great tank that people want in your groups, you're going to need to do a little bit of studying. You're going to need to look at the guys who are doing heavy dungeons, you know, who are doing like the 17s plus. And bear in mind, what routes are they taking? Why are they doing it? Are they doing things, and this is a big question you should always ask yourself, are they doing things that require a lot more coordination than you can allow in a pug? This is a big, important part of being a tank. Like, you might know some very cool strategies. Do they involve things like mass stealth? Do they involve, like, Tol de Go, for instance? Do we have a blacksmith with keys? Do we have a rogue? Do we have all these things that are utilized in order to make the dungeon go faster? But are they applicable to the scenario I'm in? This, definitely, I'm sort of monkeying around the obvious one here, which is skips. Skips are a very big one, right? Skips are a big, big thing, because often skips are not something that are very well applied into a pug environment. You will encounter people who not only don't know about the skip, but actually don't know the dungeon mechanics at all yet. A classic one would be Shrine of the Storm. I'm sure many of you have been to the third boss of Shrine of the Storm, I believe it's the third, where somebody has been mind-controlled and they have to run into the orbs. Some of you might not even know what I'm talking about right now. And you'll watch them try and run away. They think they're going to blow up. They think they're going to do something. They're not quite sure what's happening. And then they become mind-controlled and bad things happen from there. Because they don't know what you're supposed to do there. They don't know they're supposed to collect the orbs. Right? So bear that in mind. Plenty of people don't know that because they've never experienced it. So trying to immediately suggest something like a skip where you're bypassing certain trash, which requires knowledge of where the trash location and the patrols are and things like that, could often be too much. So bear in mind what stuff is applicable to you. Are you on comms? You know, things like that. Are we talking to each other here? Are we asking what people want? So on and so forth. The next one is... The next thing you would probably say about tanking, if I was to ask you, would be, of course, taking as little damage as possible, using defensive cooldowns. Now, this is where a lot of people stumble as well. When do I use what defensive for what? I recently had a very deep conversation with one of my top-tier Patreons. They get like a... this isn't a sellout, by the way. I'm just saying we get they get a private Discord where they can ask me questions and talk to me and things like that. And a quite large conversation because they love tanking, but they're very worried about using their defensive cooldowns properly, and are they using them effectively in order to prevent death, right? And also, you'll have weird encounters. Many of you will have had this, especially healers, where you've healed one player playing a prot warrior, and they don't seem to take much damage at all. And then you healed another prot warrior, and they took all the damage. And it all comes down to defensives, because tanks do have a varied selection of defensive cooldowns. Now, the simple answer to that, by the way, is just trial and error. Tanks should always be trying and testing and doing whatever. And comms and things is a great place to do that. Again, get a guild, get a community, find something where you can talk to people. I've been in several runs, and the example I gave to that person was when we were doing Waycrest Manor, the tree boss in there has a stacking damage ability, and a big major tank smash ability called Crush. I believe it's called Crush. And in that example, the healer and the tank were just talking to each other through the whole thing. Like, as a DPS, I just remained silent. And they were like, can we do this? Let me see how this one hurts me. Do I need more dog barks? Delivery? Maybe. Hold on. Maybe. Will he continue to bark? That's the question. Seems good. Alright, I think we're okay. Nope. Okay. Back in one moment. And I'm back. My family is home. The timing is perfect. It is the boss. Okay. So, yeah, trial and error. Those are all the things you need. Ask, talk to people. Let's pull this out of line of sight. And you'll figure it out. You'll find your place. Now, those are basics, though. Hold aggro. Lead the group. Other people can lead the group. Take as little damage as possible. Even on, if you're going to stick to easy content, doesn't really matter. I could tank this dungeon without using defensive if I wanted to. What are the more advanced things? Increasing the group's damage. That is also the job of the tank. Increase the group's damage. We do that in a number of ways. Some of you will know the word I'm about to say. The death ball. The death ball is a key component of tanking. I'm going to show you the death ball in a minute. In fact, I've shown you throughout this video the death ball. I'm doing it right now, in fact. I'm doing it right now. What else? Preventing the group from taking extra damage. Also a big thing that tanks do. Also a big thing that tanks do. What else? Oh, I interrupted it. So many rages right now, I know. But we're in heroic. We're okay. Watching out and monitoring the group. What does that mean? Is the group all here? Are they actually here? How's the healer's mana? These are all things I need to know as the tank. Yeah? Because I need to make my decisions. How many tanks have you seen pull while the healer was out of mana? Or somebody hadn't returned from a death yet? These are all slightly more advanced things. Slightly more advanced. In fact, they're very simple. Very simple things. Let's cover threat capping first in terms of not being overwhelmed. So in the last TDP on Sunday, we showed how Blizzard actually does great dungeon design. They introduce you to mechanics usually a pack or so earlier than it's going to become a problem. Right? So they introduced us, we did a freehold. They introduced us to harpooners a pack or two before the harpooners were then paired up with things that would prevent that you would want to get out of melee range in. Right? They did that a pack or so earlier. It's like, hey, here's this thing called a harpooner. It's going to suck you in. The next pack or so has something that does dangerous things while you're up close. So Blizzard does do that. They try and show you things, but usually they're so non-threatening, it becomes very, very difficult to learn from that, because it never hurt you until it came to the point where it was actually really deadly. So that's the only letdown there, is it doesn't do a great job of showing you what you should be doing. What's the threat cap then? So it's a lot of tanks were like, yeah, that's all great and stuff, Preachy, but you're showing it from a healing perspective, and DPS don't really care about these things. If I'm constantly having to deal with tanking the dungeon, then I find this way, way more difficult. Right? Okay, what's the threat cap? The idea some people have of how threat works in WoW. So what is threat? When I attack the enemy, I cause threat against it. As the tank, I need to do more threat than the DPSs so that the enemies look at me. In fact, this is a death ball situation. Let's just switch subjects for a second. This pack is all over the place. Let's make it easy. So what are we going to do? We're going to aggro everything. All right. There's one mob that's loose. I'm going to give that a taunt. And now I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to stun these. And I'm going to try and keep aggro, because I've got enough threat there. I've lost this one. Okay. I'm going to aggro them, and I'm going to pull them all into one spot. You see this? Now, this is great, because this means DPS is good. Now, I'm doing this by line of sighting. As you can see, I'm line of sighting mobs around corners while having threat on them, making them run to me. See this? And what I've done is taken a pack that's all over the place. They're all spread out. They're all over, you know, they're a real nightmare. And I've got every single one into one spot. Now, how did I do that? Well, I utilized a couple of tricks. When I interrupt a caster, it locks it out of a spell school. That means it can't cast any spells, right? Now, some mobs don't work like that, but most of them do. Most of them do. So, using that knowledge, I stopped the casters from casting. That meant that the casters would follow me and try and melee me because they can't cast spells. That means I can move them. The next thing I did was run around and get threat on as many things as possible, but only quick, because I need to get threat on everything, which means I can only do, like, tickly spells, which is why you lose aggro on 1 or 2 for a moment. That's fine. And then I utilize line of sight. If it's a ranged mob, like a marine who's trying to shoot me, or a caster who's trying to cast on me because he can cast his spells again, they're going to try and cast their spells or shoot me with their guns and whatever. So if I hide behind a wall, they can't. So what they do is they try and run to a place where they can shoot me with their abilities. So what I do in response to that is I tank just around a corner. That means all the melee mobs are going to be stood there too. And that caster or ranged mob is going to run, right? He's going to move in order to try and get me. And the place he can easily get me is in the middle of everything else. What this means is we've got everything in one place, in one ball where they're going to die. Voila! The death ball. And that is how the death ball is created. That's how we do it. We utilize those tricks all the time. So look, one big thing about tanking in general is just look for walls, look for gaps, anything like that. If you've got them all spread out like this and they're shooting somebody who's in a cannon, I can go around and taunt individually, but it's kind of a waste of time. What I actually want to do, like casters aren't going to move anyway, right? They're not going to do anything, so I can leave those there. As long as everything's getting cleaved. Cleaving things is a big deal. Right, the threat cap. So the idea that a lot of people have about the threat cap, or what is the threat cap and threat in general, is that you're in a constant battle between yourself and the damage dealers. You're in this constant war, this tit-for-tat war. Well, it doesn't quite work like that. And in fact, it works to your advantage in the way it actually works. You do bonus threat, which means you don't have to do much of anything in order to hold aggro. So I'm going to demonstrate for you this now. I'm going to attack this mob until it hits 90% HP. Alright, and then I'm going to stop pressing any abilities. 90%. I'm going to call that good. We'll keep our ignore pain on. I'm calling that good. I'm calling GG's. Let's see how long it takes a DPS to take it off me. I don't want to take extra damage doing this, so I'm ignoring pain. Even before someone shouts at me because I'm auto-attacking. What did we learn? Even with the BFA changes to threat and whatever, it depends a lot. Okay, there's variation. Okay, so that won't work every time. Why? Your threat is directly relatable to the damage people can put out. If people, if you have a DPS who can do 5, 6, 7 times more damage than you, you're gonna have to work a little bit harder to make threat against them. But what you saw there was a very clear demonstration of the threat cap. Basically, the threat cap is you do so much threat as a tank that, in fact, in nearly all scenarios, you do enough threat within the first few moments. Someone's shooting me. Within the first few moments, that it would be physically impossible for any DPSer to take the threat off you. Think about it like this. When you're in a raid, you might be worried, as I was when I first started tanking, about having to tank against all these DPSs. So I started tanking back in Classic. So I was tanking against like 30 damage dealers or 32 damage dealers who were all going to pop off. In fact, you're not. You're tanking against whoever does the most damage. That's it. You're only tanking against one guy ever. The rest of them don't matter. It's whoever. So in this case, it would have been Flodo. Is the only guy I'm actually tanking against. Now, what this means is, and why this is important for not being overwhelmed in Mythic Plus, is you need to understand that you can do very little threat, right? You only have to do a very tiny amount of work to actually do the threat component. The rest of the time, and I know people want to do great damage, but the rest of the time, certainly while you're learning to tank and do things, you actually have more free time than anywhere else in the dungeon. Like, everything I'm doing now is just for DPS's sake. Literally, it's just for DPS's sake. I can look around and learn and figure out all the stuff about what the dangerous trash is, how I can make better death balls, how I can improve things for everybody else. I have all this time because every single button I am pressing right now that isn't just mitigation, so ignore pain, shield block, whatever, is purely for DPS's sake. It's nothing to do with threat at all. They can't possibly take threat off me, right? They can't possibly do this. And it works. It works. So that's the threat cap. Once you've done so much threat that an enemy, your friendly team members can no longer take threat off you. Now this varies a lot, and you're going to say, well, how do I know if I hit the threat cap? It comes from feel. It comes from feel, and that's not very helpful, but it's true, and you'll get a feel for it. What kind of DPSs am I working with? Have I got some mega hitting fucking arms warrior who's going to come in and bro storm things up? I might have to work a little bit harder, but I also know that that is going to run out. That burst is going to drop off, and if I've got aggro after the burst, I'm fine. Every single upgrade you get increases how much threat you do per ability, so you'll hit the threat cap much earlier. And the threat cap is just this: doing enough threat so that by the time that enemy dies, the friendly players cannot take aggro from you. That's all it is. But it's actually a very, very small amount. It's a ludicrously small amount. Even at the higher gear levels, it's a very small amount. And that's why affixes like Skittish can exist. Because tanks who... basically, what does Skittish do? And it depends on the class. I know we can get into some technicalities here. But Skittish, basically, as long as you've got a balanced group, means that you have to constantly be doing your best DPS rotation. More than anything. Because outside of Skittish, you could do exactly what we did just there, which is kind of like nothing. You don't have to do anything, right? Because we can hit the threat cap relatively earlier. Now, again, it does vary, but that's the idea of the threat cap. And once you realize that you can actually hit this threat cap really quickly in nearly all your groups, there'll be very rarely you're teamed with somebody who is so outrageously over-geared that they're a constant problem. The only time you might, I mean, the worst scenario you'll run into is having to taunt the enemy back. That's about it. But other than that, you can do things like I just showed you there. And I would suggest you go into dungeons, try it out for yourself. In a relatively balanced group, it's the same situation. Don't think that if everybody here was 380 or whatever, there'd be any difference. There really isn't. Really isn't. You might get some guys who do crazy AoE burst, but I could tell you on my mage in particular, I can come in strong with like 100k AoE burst on a few mobs, and most tanks can hold that. True story. Most tanks can hold that. I could do a crazy fire opener, which will do something like, I don't know, 50, 60k DPS opener, and occasionally the tank might have to taunt, but he'd be surprised. Like a seasoned tank would be like, fucking hell. And they'll say something usually on comms like, whoa, that was an opener. Because their gut feel that they've learned that I talked about in this video tells them they should be fine, right? They should be fine against nearly everybody. And then someone comes in who's got some sort of silly Azerite setup like my Fire Mage does, and they'll be like, whoa. But all they're going to do is taunt back, and taunt does provide you that extra leeway just to do a few more damaging spells. But what I'm saying is, tanks, you actually have more leeway than you possibly realize. More leeway than you possibly realize in not being overwhelmed, managing the mobs correctly, grouping them up nicely, stopping the most dangerous mobs, making it so the DPS has an easier time, all these things. You have way more time than you realize once you realize that you don't need to be doing all that and managing the group and leading the group and doing a perfect DPS rotation, because that's absolutely not the case. All right, just be aware of it. I'm not saying you should AFK, but be aware that you can be a bit flexible. You can be very flexible as you learn how to get into the deeper, darker dungeons. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.